This picture astounds the entire internet. Just take a look at what the dog finds. Annie was heading home from work when she saw a dog standing over a drain, gazing into it with a look of sadness. When she glanced into the drain, she saw that the dog had found something astonishing. As Annie was on her way home from work, she walked past a store and saw a dog standing outside. The sleek black coat of the German Shepherd caught her eye, and she couldn't resist admiring its beauty. However, what she found strange was the dog's sad expression, staring at her with longing as it stood over the drain. She saw the dog appeared unhappy, and it pulled at her heartstrings, but she chose to continue walking home. She assumed the owner was inside the store and would soon take the dog home. Annie just wanted to rest after her long day. She didn't have time to stop and comfort the dog. The next day, when she walked down the same street, she saw the dog again. It was still standing over the same drain, looking sadly into it. This time around, she wanted to get some groceries from the store, and as she approached the shop, the dog eyed her wearily. She noted the way his entire body tensed as she walked past it. Eventually, she made her way through the door, and she looked back at the canine through the glass pane. She saw him look sadly into the drain again. She guessed that he was hungry, and that he knew the store sold treats, which was why it had camped right outside it. As she examined more closely, she became increasingly convinced that the dog was unowned from what she could see. It seemed like he had spent the entire night outside the store, curled up on the cold pavement. The thought of this poor dog spending the night alone on the streets broke her heart. She decided that she had to do something to help it, and the first step was to feed it. She wanted to ease his hunger and show it some kindness. As she bought her groceries, she also bought treats for it. They were mostly dried meat, and she knew that he was going to love them. She bought enough to fill it up, because she didn't know when next he would get a meal after finishing her shopping. She stepped out of the store with a bag of treats in her hand. She then carefully set the treats on the ground, smiling as she encouraged the dog to enjoy them. The dog watched her for a few minutes but remained completely still. She noticed that he was still wary of her, so she stepped away from the food. The dog immediately went forward and began to pick the treats with his mouth, but to her shock, it didn't eat them. It simply took them over to the drain and began to slide them through the grates, one after the other. Each treat slipped through and disappeared into the ditch below. Annie stood, frozen in shock, her eyes fixed on the scene before her. She couldn't fathom what the dog had just done. It was then that she realized her mistake. The dog wasn't waiting for treats from passers-by, but was instead fixated on something in the drain. She wondered what could be so captivating that the dog would prioritize it over his hunger. Something was clearly amiss, and Annie's curiosity was piqued. She was determined to uncover the mystery. She moved towards the drain, hoping to catch a glimpse. But the moment she took a few steps, the dog charged to its feet and gave a warning bark. Its entire body was tensed up, and he looked ready to attack her. Whatever it was protecting it wanted no one anywhere near it. The message it conveyed was crystal clear. As Annie gazed at the dog, she suddenly realized that it was poised to attack her. At the slightest provocation, a wave of fear washed over her. She was genuinely terrified, a feeling she had never experienced before when confronted by a dog. When Annie was a child, she had an intense longing for a puppy and persistently begged her mother for months to get one. She dreamed of having a furry companion to play with and love. However, her single mother, who was struggling to make ends meet with no financial support, couldn't afford to care for a dog. Despite her own desires, she had to prioritize providing for Annie's basic needs. Annie's mother patiently explained their situation, and eventually Annie came to understand and stopped asking for a puppy As she grew up, her interest in dogs gradually faded away, but fate had other plans. Years later, as an adult, Annie faced a difficult time when her mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and their roles became reversed. Annie found herself caring for her mother, trying everything possible to make her final days comfortable, peaceful, and joyful, despite the painful reality that their time together was limited. During that time, Annie lost a considerable amount of weight, making her appear like a mere shadow of her former self. She was constantly struggling financially, as all her income went toward her mother's hospital bills. Eventually, her mother succumbed to death's cold embrace when her mother passed away. Annie was sitting by her bedside, holding her hand tightly. She wept uncontrollably, unable to contain her grief. She was overwhelmed by the realization that she was now utterly alone in the world, with no one to turn to. Later that day, Annie returned home from the hospital, her heart still heavy with grief. As she approached her doorstep, she was taken back to find an abandoned dog sitting patiently by her entrance. The dog gazed at her with the saddest, most soulful eyes she had ever seen. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. It was as if it was pleading with her to take it in, to offer a sense of belonging and comfort. The dog's fur was matted and dirty, its ears droopy and its tail hung low, giving away its stray status. Annie's initial shock gave way to a mix of emotions she was unprepared to care for. A dog knew nothing about their needs and wasn't ready to take on that responsibility. Yet her sorrowful state left her unable to muster the energy to chase it away, so she ignored it and stepped inside at midnight. Annie struggled to sleep, her mind consumed by thoughts of her mother. Moreover, she was distracted by gentle barking outside her house when the noise became too persistent to ignore. She got up to investigate and traced the sound to her front door. Upon opening it, she was shocked to find the dog still there, barking. Softly, she had forgotten all about it, thinking that it had gone sadly. It had been raining and the dog was drenched. It was chilly, and it also had a runny nose. It broke her heart to see him like that, and she felt a sense of blame. She immediately took him in, and the dog happily went to set himself by the fire. She also took out a blanket and covered it for the rest of the night. She remained at the fireplace with the dog. It was as if they had bonded without meaning to. She felt like they were mourning together, and that grief was what held them together. The next day it didn't even cross her mind to send it away. The dog became a part of her life, and she even named it Comfort. She loved him so much and took him with her when her mother was eventually buried. Annie and Comfort navigated the darkness of grief together, and in doing so they found a way to heal and emerge stronger on the other side. As years passed, Annie was finally able to return to how life used to be before she lost her mum. Sadly, another tragedy occurred. Annie couldn't understand how it happened. She had returned home from work one evening, expecting to see Comfort's wagging tail and happy face inside the house, but instead she found him outside, his eyes shining with excitement. She was confused, thinking she must have forgotten to lock the gate, but it didn't feel right. She was always so careful. As she approached the road, Comfort saw her and let out a joyful bark, his tail wagging wildly. Annie's heart swelled with love, and she quickened her pace to meet him. But Comfort was too excited to wait. He darted into the road, not seeing the car speeding around the corner. Annie's world seemed to slow down as she watched. In terror, the car screeched to a halt, but it was too late. Comfort's body lay still, his eyes frozen in a permanent stare. Annie's scream echoed through the silence as she rushed to her Bell LED dog's side. She cradled his lifeless body, tears streamed down her face, and she begged him to come back to her, but it was too late. Comfort was gone, taken from her in an instant, For a long time, following the accident, Annie felt completely numb. This emotion was like experiencing the loss of her mother all over again. Comfort, a friend who had come to mean so much to her, was gone. She blamed herself for the mistake that led to his escape. If she had locked the gate, he would never have gotten out of the house. Eventually, Annie forced herself to regain control. She told herself that neither her mother nor Comfort would want to see her fall apart. She needed to be strong for them. Annie returned to work, but nothing was the same as it used to be. She was coping with the change, but it was difficult. Annie attempted to replace Comfort with another dog, but she found it too painful. Whenever she went to the pound, she broke down in tears and had to leave. Annie realized that no dog could replace Comfort. She promised herself that she would never get another pet. Since then, Annie has avoided dogs and any personal attachments to them altogether now, though. As she stared at the dog standing over the drain, she was confused. She had thought it might have been hungry, but it had poured all the treats down the drain. She needed to know what was in the drain, but from where she stood, she couldn't see anything. She realized then that she had to devise another way to look down the drain. She waved at him as she took her leave. The dog watched her retreating until she was out of sight. Then he kept looking down into the drain. What the dog didn't know, though, was that Annie had a plan. Later that night, she walked out of her house, dressed in black clothes, so she could blend in with the darkness. She returned to the spot where she saw the dog, hoping that it wouldn't be there, and she could sneak a peek. She was wrong. The dog was still right there, standing guard when she went too close. He barked ferociously at her to prevent drawing unwanted attention to herself. She immediately turned around and ran off. She became more confused. The dog was refusing to leave the spot, and she found that mysterious. She was eager to understand why. However, this time she required a strategy, a more effective one. She knew now that the dog wouldn't leave the drain for any reason, and as long as it didn't trust her, it wouldn't allow her to come close. The only option she had was to gain its trust, and that could only be achieved by becoming his friend. She started the very next day. She named the dog Ninja, due to his glossy black fur and how beautiful it was when she returned from work. She walked into the store and bought treats for him. She watched him eat some and slide the rest through the drain, but she did nothing. She did the same thing day after day, buying treats and watching him eat, and then throwing the rest down the drain every time she called him by his new name so that he could get used to it in less than a week. She began to make headway. Ninja quickly began to look forward to her visits. Whenever he saw her, he would wag his tail excitedly and look at her expectantly with his beautiful eyes. She would then buy treats and give them to him, and he would allow her to pet him. It was a beautiful process, and neither of them noticed they were bonding. Not long afterward, Ninja had trusted her enough to come very close to the drain. At long last, the long-awaited day arrived. Annie was ready to discover what was hidden in the drain. She stood over the drain and looked in, but she couldn't make out anything. It was pitch dark in there, and there was no visible sign of anything. She didn't lose hope. However, she dropped to her knees and lowered her eyes to the drain. She didn't care that people were staring at her and wondering what was wrong with her. She was focused on finding out what was in the drain. Yet she still found nothing. However, with her face so close to the drain, she soon heard a faint sound. It was tiny, and she almost didn't hear it over the noise of traffic all around her. She turned to the side, lowered her ear to the drain, and the sound became a bit clearer. She could hear soft meowing sounds. A kitten was stuck in the drain with her heart pounding heavily in her chest. She immediately called the fire department and told them everything, asking them to come over. The firemen arrived in record time. As soon as she saw them, she pointed to the drain. The grate was removed immediately, and one of the firemen peered inside with a flashlight. He nodded at once, confirming her suspicion that a kitten was trapped there. However, there was an even bigger surprise. The drain was deep, so one of the men had to jump in to be able to get the kitten out. He took out the kitten, then he took out another and another. He kept taking out kittens from the ditch until there were 6 of them in total. Annie's mouth fell open in shock as she stared at the little things. She couldn't believe that they had all been stuck there all the while, and no one knew. The fireman surmised that the kittens had been swept into the drain by heavy rainfall and had gotten stuck. Annie stared at Ninja in wonder. She realized just how adorable he was. He had noticed the kittens were stuck there and had refused to leave them alone, so he shared his treats with them and protected them. He didn't trust anyone to care for them, and that was the reason he had been so aggressive to begin with. Now, with the kittens safely out of the ditch, his tail wagged excitedly and he kept jumping. As he tried to lick Annie's feet, she took him over to where the kittens were placed. A few of them were ill, and they were being prepped to be transported to the nearest vet. People took pictures of the dog and the kittens. They were all impressed by the intelligence he had displayed, because they knew that if not for him, the poor things would still be stranded in the ditch. While the kittens were taken to the vet for treatment, Annie took Ninja home because she couldn't leave him out on the streets. He also seemed eager to accompany her during the journey. He wagged his tail with excitement. He was the first dog she had taken home with her since Comfort passed, and she was a bit skeptical, scared that he wouldn't like the place. Thankfully, she was wrong. He loved her house, and he jumped around so much that she laughed hard. He reminded her of how things had been between her and Comfort. The duo spent the next few weeks doing things together, eating, running around, and lots more. They even slept in the same bed. Annie's heart overflowed with love, and she knew she'd found a new companion to share life's joys with. She realized that she loved Ninja very much, so she decided to make things was official. She got the necessary papers and adopted him. Meanwhile, the kittens had all found loving homes to be placed in. Now they had devoted families who would care for and protect them no matter what. Moreover, the internet was flooded with images of Ninja and the kittens. People couldn't stop talking about what he did, and they wanted to see more of it. Annie was pleased and proud of him for this. Did you enjoy this story? Would you have behaved like Anna? Do you have a dog? Have you ever adopted one? How important is it to you? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, please subscribe to this channel and leave a like. We all face a lot of difficulties, but if we don't give up, we can be happy. Again, thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.